Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. In this column, the writer takes a look at the Himalayas beyond its geopolitics, its history, and security concerns. The writer is of the opinion that the Himalayan states have always viewed the mountains through the prism of geopolitics and traditional security concerns, and as a result, other crucial frameworks and approaches have been entirely ignored. See, as you can see in this picture, the Himalayan mountains is a transnational geographical feature. The Himalayas doesn't exclusively belong to any particular country, but instead it stretches all the way from the Hindu Kush mountains and the Pamir Knot and through the Karakoram all the way up to the tri-junction of India, China and Myanmar. So the Himalayas stretches from the borders of Afghanistan and extends all the way up to the borders of Myanmar, thus covering 5 nation states in the process, which includes Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan and China. These nation states have always approached the Himalayan mountains purely from a nationalistic perspective, and thus they've always viewed the Himalayas through the prism of geopolitics and security concerns. See, there is no doubt that the Himalayan mountains are strategic in nature. It literally acts as a wall that cuts off the Indian subcontinent from the Tibetan plateau with only a few strategic passes connecting the two regions. So historically and geopolitically, from the perspective of trade and security, and as well as from the military and diplomatic perspective, the Himalayan mountains have always been viewed as a strategic territorial asset by the nation states. So such nationalization and territorialization of the Himalayas can be seen from the colonial days itself. The British India government, which saw India as their most prized asset, they sought to protect and defend their most precious colony in Asia by setting up the Himalayan mountains as a strategic buffer against any possible invasion from the north, particularly from Russia. Throughout the 1800s and 1900s, the British colonial government in India had developed a Russia-phobic view as it had reasons to believe that the Russians could possibly invade the British India colony from the north, thus leading the British to approach the Himalayas purely from a geopolitical perspective. And this is what explains the buffer strategy that the British employed while dealing with the Himalayan states and the Himalayan kingdoms. For example, while dealing with the Tibetan kingdom and the Nepali kingdom and the Bhutanese kingdom, and as well as with Sikkim, the British never fully integrated these regions into British India, and they willingly gave these regions or these kingdoms more autonomy while purchasing their loyalty and commitment to defend the British India colony. The British essentially set up these kingdoms as buffer states which could act as a cushion against any possible invasion from the north. In fact, the same buffer strategy was borrowed by India post-independence, but now the threat for India was China. As China started displaying its territorial aggression from the 1950s, and as it started its expansionist behavior, India had to borrow the buffer strategy of the British and cultivated strong defense and strategic relations with Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan. According to the writer, it is such nationalized and territorial views of the Himalayas which has led to violent clashes, conflicts, and disputes between the nation states of the Himalayan mountains. In fact, if you look at the current state of tensions between India and China, it is entirely rooted in the complex history and geopolitics of the Himalayan mountains. Be it China's annexation of Tibet in 1950, or the later uprising in Tibet and the exodus of Tibetan refugees into India, then of course the 1962 war between India and China, and as well as the ongoing border tensions and disputes. They're all an outcome of treating the Himalayas as purely a geopolitical asset, and it is a result of the traditional approach of the countries to look at Himalayas purely from the territorial sovereignty perspective on the basis of trade, security, military, and diplomatic advantages. The same analysis explains the tensions between India and Pakistan as well. Look at the Kashmir conflict or the border disputes, including the Siachen dispute. It is entirely a result of the geopoliticization of Himalayas where India and Pakistan do not view the Himalayas as a shared asset. Instead, they look at the Himalayas as their respective national assets. This is what gives rise to the partitioning of the Himalayas, where India, for example, views the Himalayas under its territorial control as the Indian Himalayas. The same approach is followed by the other countries as well, including Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, and as well as by China. In a very interesting analogy, the writer says that this is similar to the popular fable involving a few blind men and an elephant. The story goes that a few blind men, while they are trying to describe how an elephant looks, they feel different parts of the elephant and give an entirely different description. So this gives rise to a very incomplete picture, and according to the writer, that's exactly what's happening with the Himalayas as well. The concerned nation states have partitioned the Himalayas based on their traditional sovereignty approach, and they have nationalized their respective stretches of the Himalayan mountains. And this attempt at excessive nationalization lays the foundation for violent clashes and conflicts between them, and it also results in the complete neglect of the other dimensions of the Himalayan mountains. Even China, for that matter, approaches the Himalayas purely from a strategic geopolitical perspective, and this is very clear from its policies towards Tibet. Be it its violent annexation in 1950, or be it China's crushing of human rights in Tibet, which eventually resulted in the exodus of Tibetan population into India. This is also explained by China's policies towards its Himalayan neighbors, such as India, Nepal, and Bhutan. In fact, there exists an interconnection over here. In order to consolidate its hold over Tibet, Mao Zedong came out with the so-called five-finger policy, according to which he viewed five critical regions of Himalayas as an extension of Tibet, and he advocated that China should dominate and influence these five fingers in order to consolidate its hold and position over Tibet. In Mao Zedong's view, if Tibet was the palm of the hand, he saw Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal Pradesh as the five fingers of Tibet. Based on this strategic geopolitical approach, China started exerting influence and pressure in these so-called five fingers or the five extensions of Tibet, thereby leading to China's conflicts with India, Nepal, and Bhutan. Then China's traditional security concerns in the Xinjiang province and in Central Asia is what drives China to form a nexus with Pakistan, even going to the extent of tolerating terrorism and planning joint ambitious projects such as the CPEC corridor. Even though Pakistan's policy of state-sponsored terrorism affects India, and even though the alignment of the CPEC corridor violates India's sovereignty claims, China has persisted with these initiatives and even backs Pakistan by forming a joint nexus that stretches across the Himalayas. Even Nepal and Bhutan, for that matter, they treat the part of the Himalayas that falls under their territorial jurisdiction as their national asset. They fail to take a comprehensive view of the Himalayas, and the same can be seen even in the geostrategy of Pakistan. Be it the Kashmir dispute and the Kashmir conflict between India and Pakistan, and be it Pakistan's state policy of sponsoring terrorism against India, and even Pakistan's strategic closeness with China, they can all be explained through the geopolitical prism through which Pakistan views Himalayas. So such nationalistic territorial claims of the concerned countries has led to a territorial and sovereignty based approach where all the five nation states are just looking at the Himalayas from the political, diplomatic, and military perspective. This has even led countries to become ultra sensitive about how Himalayas are described and depicted. And for example, it has been reported in another article in today's newspaper that China has seized a few world maps which depicted Arunachal Pradesh to be a part of India. Similarly, in India, even a slightly inaccurate depiction of Jammu and Kashmir and the border areas along the Himalayas triggers a massive outrage in the country, thus leading to the ultra-nationalization of the Himalayas. The writer says that this entire approach of all the countries is based on looking at Himalayas only through the geopolitical prism and through the strategic prism. And this has led the nation states and the governments and even the people of these regions to look at Himalayas and approach Himalayas only from the traditional security perspective. As a result, the only security threats that they perceive are political threats, diplomatic threats, military threats, all of which are based on threats to territorial sovereignty and integrity of the nation. Such excessive adherence to the traditional approach has only aggravated the conflicts and disputes in the region, even leading to massive violence between the states. And no country is willing to adopt a common approach to look at Himalayas as a shared asset. So the writer says that there is an urgent need to pursue alternative approaches towards the Himalayan mountains, especially in the intellectual domain. And it is very important for scholars, academics, students, and even think tanks and government institutions to adopt a different approach towards the Himalayas and start treating it as a shared geography that defines the destinies of all the five countries. In the traditional approach, the nation states have assumed that only geopolitics and history defines the Himalayas. According to the writer, this is a very wrong presumption because history can be subjective. India's version of history is not the same as Pakistan's version of history. India's perspective of Himalayan geopolitics is not the same as China's perspective of the Himalayan geopolitics. This subjectivity leads to a narrower approach, which ignores other key concerns and threats being faced by Himalayas, and it only leads to the aggravation of conflicts and disputes. So the writer says that we should not be looking at the Himalayas only from the perspective of geopolitics and history, because it is the geography of the region which has shaped the history and the geopolitics of the region, and it is not the other way around. As we all know, the Himalayan mountains is blessed with one of the most sensitive ecological systems, consisting of rich biodiversity and wildlife. And along with prioritizing the environmental and ecological needs of Himalayas, we need to prioritize the indigenous people and the communities which are at the very core of the Himalayan ecosystem, along with protecting their rich and unique culture. The Himalayan ecosystem has been a melting pot of different cultures, and since the ancient times, this region has not only promoted trade and connectivity, but it has also promoted the exchange of ideas and even faith and philosophical teachings, which represents a very important human connection in the region. The writer says that nation states and the people of the region, they need to move away from this traditional approach and look at Himalayas from alternative prisms, where we appreciate the shared geography and the shared ecosystems and prioritize the people and the culture of the region. Because according to the writer, the Himalayas is also dealing with several non-traditional security threats. This includes the violation of human rights due to repeated conflicts, disputes, and wars, the issue of forced migration due to use of force by countries such as China. The region is also afflicted with several forms of crime, including human trafficking and arms trafficking, and the Himalayan region has emerged as a hub for transnational crimes. Apart from these people-centric issues, the Himalayas is more importantly dealing with several environmental challenges, including the effects of climate change, which has resulted in the melting of the Himalayan glaciers, followed by ecological devastation of the region due to unplanned development, and the unsustainable exploitation of Himalayan resources has only aggravated the impact of natural disasters, thereby leading to frequent floods, landslides, and other high-intensity natural calamities in the region. Upon this, the sensitive environment and biodiversity of the Himalayas is also threatened by hunting, poaching, wildlife trafficking, and as well as by environmental pollution. These challenges being faced by the Himalayas are largely being neglected by the states, as they are currently obsessed with the geopolitical and traditional security challenges that they are facing in the Himalayas. Hence, the writer is calling upon the nation states to visualize Himalayas from an alternative perspective so that the other crucial issues are not ignored. Now, let's take up an editorial from page number 8. The Union Cabinet has approved an amendment bill to amend the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation Act of 1961. This bill has been introduced in the parliament during the monsoon session, and through this amendment, the government is seeking to protect the depositors who deposit their money with banks. See, banks seek out deposits from depositors in order to raise capital for their lending activities. In return, the banks are expected to honor the commitments that they have made to their depositors, and be it deposits made into savings accounts or fixed deposits or recurring deposits. Banks are expected and obligated to fulfill and honor these commitments by paying back the depositors as and when they require, along with the prescribed interest rates. Only a bank which is in a healthy financial situation can honor these commitments, and if a bank fails or collapses, then it won't be in any position to honor these commitments made to the depositors. In such a scenario, the depositors will run the risk of losing their hard earned savings, thus threatening the very confidence of the public in the banking system. Recently, there have been several such incidents. For example, the collapse of the PMC Bank or Yes Bank or Lakshmi Vilas Bank. These are all examples where the banks failed to honor the commitments made to the depositors. And as these banks went bankrupt due to bad loans and non-performing assets, the RBI had to step in and place a moratorium on these banks. Meaning, the RBI placed a temporary hold on any deposit withdrawals, and as a result, lakhs of depositors who had deposited their savings in these banks would not be able to withdraw their deposits. So, in such extreme circumstances, to protect the depositors and their hard earned savings, the government, along with the RBI, have put in place a deposit insurance and credit guarantee mechanism which provides for insurance against these bank deposits. For this purpose, a dedicated corporation has been set up through the 1961 Act, and accordingly, the banks which are receiving deposits from the depositors, they have to pay an insurance premium as per the standards and guidelines laid down by the RBI. And in case of a collapse of this bank, or if the RBI places a moratorium on withdrawal of deposits, then the depositors would be paid the insurance amount by this corporation in order to protect the financial stability of the depositor. So it essentially provides a guaranteed insurance against the deposits that have been made by depositors in banks. Until last year, the maximum insurance amount that would be provided by the corporation was just 1 lakh rupees. That is, irrespective of the amount that you have deposited in the bank, each depositor would get a maximum of 1 lakh rupees, which was the limit set back in 1993. This limit was grossly insufficient and it had not been revised for several years. But last year, in a landmark move, the Government of India carried out a major reform and raised the insurance limit to 5 lakh rupees. Following several incidents of bank failure, the government stepped in to protect the depositors and raised the insurance limit by 5 times, thereby offering better security to the depositors. Now the government is looking to bring in a new amendment bill which has been approved by the Union Cabinet, and it has even been introduced in the Parliament in the ongoing monsoon session. Through this bill, the government is planning one more major reform to this act, which places a 90-day deadline on the corporation to pay the insurance amount to the depositors after a particular bank has been placed under moratorium by the RBI. See, until now, if a bank was placed under moratorium, then the resolution of the insurance payment would take several years. There are cases where the insurance amount has been paid almost 7 or 8 years after the bank went under moratorium. So depositors who would have trusted the banking system and placed their hard-earned savings in the banking system cannot be left in such a dire situation for years together, and hence the government has decided to introduce faster resolution of the payment of this insurance, and a strict 90-day deadline is being brought in. So as soon as a bank goes under default and as soon as RBI places the bank under moratorium, then within 90 days the corporation, that is the DICGC, has to clear the insurance payments in order to provide immediate relief to the depositors. The editorial appreciates the government for this landmark move, as it helps in reducing the financial distress that depositors have been facing as household savings have gone down of late. Especially after the pandemic broke out, household savings has come under immense stress, and at this time it has become very important to protect the depositors' money. At least to the extent possible, the government and the RBI are ensuring the depositors' money is guaranteed, and subject to a maximum limit of 5 lakh rupees, all depositors would be paid an insurance when the deposits they have made in a bank goes under a moratorium. This would come as a great relief to most of the depositors because according to RBI data, even though only 51% of the deposits have been insured, majority of the depositors get automatically insured because nearly 98.3% of the accounts with banks have less than 5 lakh rupees in those accounts. So automatically all these accounts get covered under the insurance scheme and nearly 98% of the depositors will be fully insured. So those who have deposited under 5 lakh rupees, they will get back their entire savings, and those above that would be compensated to a maximum limit of 5 lakh rupees. This will particularly help the depositors who have placed their money in banks which are dealing with bad loans, non-performing assets, and willful defaults. These cases have gone up, thereby placing banks under greater distress, and such deposit insurance guarantee is extremely essential to protect the financial stability of the banking system and as well as to restore and protect the faith of the depositors in the banking system. But however, these provisions do not apply to cooperative societies as there are still several gaps in the coverage of deposits made at cooperative banks, and hence the editorial is calling upon the Government of India and the RBI to extend this coverage to cooperative banks as well. They're calling for a complete coverage of cooperative banks so that these depositors are also given complete coverage under this insurance guarantee scheme. Then the amendment proposed by the government also proposes to raise the premium amount on the insurance that is to be paid by the banks to the Deposit Insurance Credit Guarantee Corporation. Here the editorial offers a suggestion to raise this premium frequently as per inflation trends and as per rising per capita income. As per these trends, if the insurance premium is raised and updated regularly, it will create an opportunity for enhancing the coverage beyond the current 5 lakh limit. So even though the government has been taking incremental steps in protecting the hard-earned savings of the depositors, the editorial appreciates the government for these reforms and calls for plugging the small gaps that exist in order to provide for comprehensive coverage to the depositors. Now let's look at an editorial from page number 8, which is related to a topic that we discussed on the 29th of July in detail. The day before yesterday, we had discussed a ruling of the Supreme Court in which the Supreme Court had held that legislative and parliamentary privileges cannot be used as a cover to provide legal immunity against criminal acts committed by legislators and elected representatives. The editorial over here agrees with this ruling of the Supreme Court and says that the Supreme Court is right in holding that legislative privilege cannot be an immunity for crimes, acts of vandalism, and offences committed in the House. Elected representatives cannot seek immunity by citing parliamentary and legislative privileges or by seeking immunity under right to free speech of Article 19. This order of the Supreme Court will go a long way in restoring order on the floor of the House, and it will act as a strong deterrent against elected representatives from resorting to acts of vandalism and from engaging in criminal acts on the floor of the House. This decision of the Supreme Court is expected to put an end to unruly behavior by elected representatives. Next, on page number 10, we have a couple of articles related to China. According to this article, India and China are all set to hold the 12th round of talks today. These talks are designed to take forward the disengagement process that both the countries are working on since border tensions broke out in the Ladakh sector last year. We have discussed in several sessions that since last year, serious border tensions broke out between India and China across multiple locations along the line of actual control, which falls in the eastern sector of the India-China border, that is along Ladakh. Following these escalations in border tensions, both the sides initiated several rounds of negotiations in order to take up disengagement and de-escalation. To take these talks and negotiations forward, hotlines was also established. There is a direct line of communication between senior military officials at the local level, and these commander level talks have provided some results. Earlier in the month of February, both the sides worked out a disengagement agreement which provided for the removal of troops and disengagement of their military positions at the strategic Penang So Lake. By implementing the terms of this agreement, both the sides fulfilled the disengagement process. But at other key locations such as Gogra, Hot Springs, Depsang Plains, Demchok, etc., the border standoff continued between the two sides. So today, the 12th round of talks have been scheduled to work out a disengagement process for Gogra and Hot Springs area. And if this is successful, other friction areas would also be taken up, that is Demchok and Depsang Plains, where both the sides will be looking to disengage and de-escalate from their current hostile positions. Then we have an article related to the first topic that we discussed today. According to this report, China has seized a large consignment of world maps which depicted Arunachal Pradesh, that is India's Arunachal Pradesh, as a part of Indian territory. You must know that China claims the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh and often refers to it as South Tibet. As per the Five Fingers policy of Mao Zedong, China treats Arunachal Pradesh as an extension of Tibet and refers to it as South Tibet. China has repeatedly denied to recognize the validity of McMahon Line, which demarcates Tibet from Arunachal Pradesh. And even though Arunachal Pradesh happens to be an integral part of India, China openly contests these claims of India, and hence any maps that depict Arunachal Pradesh otherwise are often targeted by the Chinese state. This again is an illustration of the militarization of Himalayas and how the Himalayan states look at the Himalayas only from a geopolitical perspective. Whenever China makes such controversial claims, India counters them by clearly stating that Arunachal Pradesh is a full-fledged state of India and very much an integral part of Indian territory. Finally, let's look at this article from page number 11. The BRICS grouping has finalized a counter-terrorism initiative as confirmed by the Government of India, as India currently holds the chair of the BRICS grouping, which involves Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries of the BRICS grouping have worked out a counter-terrorism action plan to strengthen their joint counter-terrorism efforts and puts in place a mechanism for result-oriented cooperation. Under this action plan, the member countries have agreed to condemn and fight against all forms of terrorism without distinguishing between terror groups and fight against terror of all forms and all manifestations whenever, wherever, and by whomsoever committed. This common stand has been taken by the BRICS countries, and it is expected to boost counter-terrorism cooperation between the BRICS members. Now let's take a look at the mains practice questions. The first question: looking at the Himalayas only through the prism of geopolitics and security concerns ignores its other crucial frameworks. Discuss. The second question: examine the recent changes proposed to the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation Act. Kindly write your answers, and you can post them on the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be shared in the description box below. So with this, let's conclude our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.